Son, and thankfully, I was one he chose to be with the Father for all of eternity. The word that got murdered.
And I've been so torn thinking about this world lately. Babylon, truth is so deluded and it drives me crazy. Babylon,
This lost world is so hopeless.
Babylon,
Jesus Christ, that's where hope is.
Babylon. No matter what they say, it's still sola scriptura.
Now these are the nations which the Lord to prove to Israel by them, even as many of Israel as had not known all the wars of Canaan. Only the generations of the children of Israel might know, to teach them war, at least such as before knew nothing thereof, namely 5 lords of the Philistines, and all the Canaanites, and the Sidonites, and the Hivites that dwelt among the Mount Lebanon, from Mount Baal Hermon unto entering of Hamath. And they were to prove Israel by them, to know whether they would hearken unto the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. And the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And they took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and served their gods. And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgot the Lord their God, and served Baalim and the groves. Therefore the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of the Cushan Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the children of Israel served Cushan Rishathaim 8 years. And when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised up a deliverer to the children of Israel, who delivered them, even Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel, and went out to war. And the Lord delivered Cushan Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hands. And his hand prevailed against Cushan Rishathaim, and the land had rest for 40 years. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord strengthened Eglon, the king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. That is Judges 3, 1 through 12.
And this is Resisting Balaam, a podcast where we seek to encourage the saints to stand firm with him on his word against all of the accusations made by the world, the flesh, and the devil as we engage the culture that loves death and demands the sacrifice of our children. I am Pastor Darren. That was Pastor Callie. And this is a Wrath and Grace podcast. You can find out more about Wrath and Grace and the Wrath and Grace Network at wrathandgrace.com. The product that I'm going to promote this week is a t-shirt. They got a lot of great t-shirts at wrathandgrace.com. This one just simply says "Every knee shall bow," which I think is a great t-shirt to wear if you're out doing street ministry or at the abortion mill. And we need to get some signs made that say that too. But I think it's a great message for evangelistic ministry, street ministry, and that sort of thing. So wrathandgrace.com, and you can find that shirt, "Every knee shall bow." The great thing about Wrath and Grace too is a lot of times when you do some research on some of these companies that print reform t-shirts and like the kind of gear that we're talking about, there's sometimes the shirts are $30-$40. And I know some of that has to do with the way that they print and different things like that. But when you buy a t-shirt at wrathandgrace.com, it's $20. So you can get this t-shirt, "Every knee shall bow," for $20 at wrathandgrace.com. I encourage you to go on there and check that out. Also, wanted to invite you to check out our Patreon account, patreon.com/resisting Balaam. If you're interested in supporting our ministry, that would be the place to do it. We're moving the podcast to video right now, and that's largely because of the faithfulness of the patrons on our Patreon account. So we certainly do appreciate you guys. When you become a patron on our Patreon account, you can become a patron for as little as $3 a month or as much as $20 a month. And what you get in response depends on the tier you come in at. At $3 a month, you get access to early episodes, early content. You also get special member-only content, and you get a 10% off coupon code for wrathandgrace.com. And then it goes up from there. We got coffee mugs and t-shirts and all kinds of. We got copies of Kelly's book. If you sign up at a certain tier, you get a free copy of Kelly's book. And so certainly appreciate our patrons. And it's because of your guys' faithful contributions that we're able to continue to expand our audience and continue to get this message to more people. So thank you for that. Patreon.com/resisting Balaam. Okay, cool. So I think that's the fastest intro that I've ever done, Callie. So
Yeah, that was good.
that was pretty quick. So
And
this discussion, we're continuing in this. We're having this discussion, this extended discussion right now about the doctrine of interposition and the doctrine of Christian civil disobedience and some of those different things. And how do we, as Christians, what are all the different ways that we as Christians can interpose on behalf of the preborn? And we've talked about being at the abortion clinic. We've talked about doing things on social media. We've talked about doctrine of lesser magistrate. We've talked about pushing legislation. We've talked about all different kinds of things. And so right now we're sort of in the midst of talking about this political aspect of things. And so we're going to talk about one side of the political battle or one perspective on it. And then next week we'll come back and we'll get the other perspective. So do you want to go ahead and introduce our guest and share a little bit about
sure.
what we're going to be talking about today?
Right. So we are going to be dealing with some of the implications of the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, where it's the magistrate that interposes and stands in the gap between the tyrant and the victim, the one that is being oppressed. And what a lot of people don't recognize as we start looking at state legislation and what happens with the legislation that we promote and pass, all of the legal and other wranglings that happen because of that. Um, so it's important for us to investigate what would happen if there was a law that criminalized abortion. But part of these implications go to not just the legislative branch, but also the executive branch, dealing with the governor and his appointments to the attorney general and such. So what a lot of people don't know is not only these implications, but that there is a debate within the movement as to which aspect we should focus our attention on leveraging. Is it the legislative aspect where we promote and help legislators win their elections in campaigns and then help them write laws and promote them and hopefully get them passed? Or do we focus our attention more on the executive branch? And there's good arguments on both sides. So we thought we'd take a couple of weeks to kind of get into what some of these arguments are. And I want to say on the onset, neither side is saying pick one side at the expense of the other. But what we are saying, though, is that one of them does have a stronger breaking point that will push this forward on a much larger scale. And so that's really what the debate is about. Today, we have Josh Malone with us, and he's a friend of ours from Oklahoma. Josh, why don't you say hi? Give us a quick introduction about yourself and your work with Free the States and how you came to be involved with interposing on behalf of the preborn.
Yeah, hey guys. So again, my name is Josh Malone. I am a longtime abolitionist. I actually met Russell in 2008. He was kind of a weird guy who kind of lurked around coffee shops in Norman while he was doing his history of science, uh, degree. I'm sure a lot of people have heard that story about that background. But yeah, I joined the Abolitionist Society of Norman when all that started. I've been a part of this since 2008, really, or 2010 when it really started. So yeah, we've been through all kinds of ups and downs. There was definitely an era where the focus was not political whatsoever, or we didn't really know how to do any of the political kind of stuff. but yeah, I'm married. My wife and I have been married now over 8 years. We've got a 7-year-old daughter and a
Awesome.
3-year-old son. Yeah, and they are awesome. And so I'm just here
That's super
selling
cool.
houses, running a business, and trying to uh, provide infrastructure. It's interesting. I stopped. I kind of course corrected and started a business and spent a whole bunch of time creating a business for a period of time uh, because of a long term desire to uh, help solve the problem of embryos in the freezer and build
Hmm.
an embryo clinic in the long term. That's really my long term vision. But because of that experience, I ended up being a really well suited person to help manage when it came time to start Free the States. So right now, I am
Right.
the president of the board of Free the States. I'm the guy who files all the IRS documentation for uh, you know getting our 501c4, all that, deals with all the bookkeeping, make sure that they don't overspend, and how much Russell likes to spend money and take on new projects. And so I'm usually the guy who tells them no, or tells them, well, here's how we have to do it or else we're going to die, and tries to keep them from breaking things. So
Yeah. As the guy who always wants to start all the new projects on my end of things, I just say that I'm thankful that we have people like you to help keep us in check so that we don't run out of money
yep,
3 months into the year,
yep.
so
No, it's funny because I've definitely historically been way more optimistic in that way, and I've had to have people anchor me. So now I feel like a translator. I'm like, I can understand you, Russell, and all the wanting to do that, but yeah, yeah.
yeah. No, that's
Man.
awesome. That's awesome, brother. And I've met your wife and kids, man, and they're awesome. Love your family.
Hmm. They're great.
Really, really, really appreciate you guys. So we're excited to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah,
Of course,
thank
Callie's going to say I'm excited to have everybody on the podcast, but
And you say it every week.
that's right, man. I'm always excited, man. It's my personality, man. I'm like a cocker spaniel or something. I don't know.
That's right.
Just
That's
always.
right. The black lab. Yeah, I get
That's
that.
right. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So, awesome. Well, we're excited and blessed. Maybe I'll go with blessed instead of excited. That sounds more spiritual
My
anyway, right?
gosh. Oh yeah, you're a
Right.
pastor. You got to use that language.
That's right. I
Yeah,
gotta use blessed. Yeah,
that's right.
blessed to have you on the podcast, man. Appreciate you being here. And appreciate the work that you're doing out at Free the States and helping keeping those guys on track and
Yeah,
uh,
love it.
and so forth, and your history in the abolition movement. So to translate all that Josh just said, for some of you who are new and maybe you don't understand some of those different things when he talks about Norman or Russell. Russell's been on the podcast before, but when he talks about being around Norman and the Abolitionist Society of Norman and all of that, like that is abolitionism in its infancy. That's where this whole thing started at. And so I just want to circle back around. And for those that are listening that haven't been heavily involved in the abolition movement yet, what Josh is talking about when he says all that is basically what he's saying is he was there when the whole thing was getting started. So I wanted to sort of interpret and translate that for anybody who's listening that
Sure.
isn't super
We're,
active.
we're all the history nerds who got inspired by the real history of what happened with William Wilberforce, William Lloyd Garrison, all those different guys,
Yeah,
and decided, hey, what does it look like to do this today? So
yeah,
Man,
yeah.
that's awesome.
yeah.
So what are some
Well, right
things?
on.
Oh, go ahead. You go ahead, Callie. Take it away, man.
Yeah. So when we start looking at this topic, right? So what are some of the ways things play out between the legislator and the executive branch when it comes to, uh, for example, the passing of a bill that would criminalize abortion? What are some of the things that could happen and go on as far as the doctrine of the lesser magistrate is concerned with the governor, and why is the governor important, and the
Yep.
AG, why is that important, and why are these legislators important? So just
Yep.
let's lay out the game field before we start
Yep.
moving into why one area is our focus.
Yeah, yeah. And so the place to start is it's not an either or proposition. Not ultimately. It's a question of where do you focus, but it's not. You can't get a law passed and enforced without the governor on your side, really. So the way it works, a bill gets proposed in either the House or the Senate. Um, so if you have a senator, you can propose in the Senate. If you have a House rep, you can propose in the House. It gets filed in a committee. Usually, the majority party leadership assigns it to a particular committee. It's supposed to go through that committee, get debated on, get amended, modified, and either pass that committee or get voted down and rejected out of that committee. Then, if it passes committee, it may have another committee it has to pass through, like a financial screening, kind of like what's the financial impact type committee, and then it goes to the floor of the chamber. So once it's on the floor of the chamber, again, the majority party leadership has the choice when to bring it up, whether to bring it up. When they bring it up, it can be voted on. If it passes with a majority out of that chamber, then it has to go to the other chamber and then get approved. So say we were to pass Senate Bill 13 last year out of the Senate chamber here in Oklahoma, that still would have had to go to the House and go through all the same process. It would go through a committee. It would go to the floor and be governed and determined what happened by the party leadership. So that's when you hear about a Speaker of the House or the Senate pro tem. That gets basically the Speaker of the Senate. Those are the party. They get elected by the majority party, and that's who installs them in those positions. So, but then whenever it passes out of both chambers, it goes before the governor to be signed. The governor has a choice to veto. If he vetoes, then it has to. I believe it's just a majority, or no, I'm sorry, a super majority. Like it has to have 66% or something, like 2/3 majority, before the Senate and House can override the governor's veto and say, well, no, it's still going to be law regardless of what the governor says. A couple different parts of interplay. Obviously, the governor still has to enforce, being the chief executive of the state. He's the one who's over many of the different police departments, and has the responsibility to make sure it's actually getting practiced. He's the one who directs the AG, like you're talking about, the Attorney General, what cases to prosecute and things like that. And so the executive is an essential piece. It's not an optional piece. He's an essential piece. He or she is an essential piece to actually getting it, like enforced and getting something done. The other piece that a lot of people don't know, in Oklahoma, lieutenant governor is actually the head of the Senate. So even though you have the Senate pro tem, who's the head of the party, the lieutenant governor technically holds that chair as the presiding officer over the Senate. Now, by tradition in Oklahoma, most of the time the lieutenant governor will pass that on to the pro tem and let the pro tem assign to committees and let the pro tem do all kinds of things. But if you had a statewide elected lieutenant governor, that lieutenant governor would also have the role and responsibility of assigning to committees and doing all those sorts of things. So there's an interplay. It's not like you can do one without the other. On the other side of stuff, it's like if the executive were to just go and start doing stuff, one of the beautiful things about our our system is that the executive doesn't even hold the purse strings. So when you want to make decisions about money, which is what just like any company, right, thrives on funds, any governmental organization, its lifeblood is the finances. It's the funds. And so the legislature is in control of the purse strings. That's a very deeply American concept, to make sure that the executive can't just go off and start doing whatever he wants to do. He has to answer to the legislature, or else the legislature will take away his funding.
Now, real quick here, just as an aside, some of the things that you just talked about, and this has been an interesting thing working in the various different states. As far as the relationship between the executive branch and the legislative branch and so forth, there are certain things that are true in every state in the United States of America. And then there are some things that work differently from state to state. So, like, for example, like in South Dakota, for example, the lieutenant governor has no power at all. It's basically just a show position.
Gotcha.
In Indiana, the lieutenant governor has a little bit of power, but I think actually the lieutenant governor in Oklahoma has the most power out of any lieutenant governor in the United States of America.
But he never uses it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Never uses it. Right. Yeah. But because, well, you got in a place like Oklahoma. Well, I'll just say it this way. You can tell me. You live in Oklahoma, right? You live in the most conservative state in the union. I
Yep.
mean, it's the misconception is that Texas is the most conservative state. That's not true by any stretch of the imagination. It's Oklahoma far and away.
We
And
have
so,
one county that usually on a presidential election will vote Democrat, and
yeah.
actually this year it voted Republican. And that's
Oh,
the county I
wow.
live in, Cleveland County, where Norman is.
Yeah.
It's the liberal county of Oklahoma. Every other county in the state
It's
votes
all red.
Republican. Yeah.
Yeah. So you got massive majorities of Republicans in both the House and the Senate. You have a Republican governor, and so you're proposing legislation that would end abortion. So that legislation obviously sailed through the Senate, went to the House, sailed through the House, went to the governor, and he signed it right away because it's pro-life Republicans, right?
Yeah, of course, right? Because that's what pro-life Republicans stand for.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it got rejected out of committee, like to the point where they didn't even allow it to be heard and voted on in committee. And there's a reason for that. Because it's so flagrantly what the people of Oklahoma would want that if they voted on it, they would get kicked out of office. But they're trying to refuse to even vote on it, let it be heard so that they can vote on it, so that they don't have to be accountable for it.
Yeah, so that gets to
Right.
when we're talking about how you got a Senate pro temp and you got a lieutenant governor and their roles sort of overlap. And you got the speaker. So you got the speaker of the House, the Senate pro temp, the governor. You got the governor, and then you got the lieutenant governor. And really, like, we think that the role of all of these people is to help institute the rule of law and so forth. But from a political standpoint, really, what they're all working together to try to do is make sure that none of their senators or representatives have to vote on anything controversial,
Right.
or
and that they protect each other, right?
Yeah,
Because,
right.
for example, in our first year, Greg Treat, the Senate pro tem, he was the one who really fell on the sword, right? It started with the committee chair getting a lot of heat from us, and then it shifted to the pro tem, and he's the one who fell on the sword. Why? Because it's a scandal for him to be so opposed to it, but that only hurts him. It protects the other Republican leadership, namely the Speaker of the House. He doesn't have to weigh in on the subject anymore. And if he were to pass the bill across to the House chamber, then he would be putting the Speaker of the House on the firing line. And it's also to protect the governor, so that the governor doesn't have to take this action, but he just gets covered by the Senate pro tem. So I firmly believe that I know they're all aware of it. I firmly believe they're all trying to figure out how to not let it through. And the Senate pro tem is the one who's taking the fall for everybody right now.
Yeah.
Right. So we have all of these moving parts in this process of criminalizing abortion, right? So, and each one of these parts is a hurdle for the abolitionists to overcome.
Yep.
Because the people actually want this, right? And if the average person in Oklahoma, right, you guys have such a majority of pro-life Christians that if you talk to them, they're like, yeah, of course we want to criminalize it, right? So they have to keep this undercover somehow to make it look like their hands are tied, or else you'll have, incumbent establishment people losing their jobs to fresh abolitionists that are trying to take them, right? So this brings up really where some of the argument gets to, right? So you've described all of these parts. Which part do we attack to expose this corruption, for lack of better words, how they're all in cahoots? Where do we marshal our forces and shine the light in a focused beam to bring exposure to this? Because like you said when we started, we're not saying do one or the other, because it all needs to be addressed. But where do we laser tight focus this beam to expose these moving parts so that the people in an uproar go, hey, why aren't you doing your job?
Yeah. Yep.
Would that be a good assessment of what we're trying to do, right?
Yeah. So of telling them that they're not doing. Yeah. If I was going to describe what the strategy is, just for starters, because it's interesting, Darren. The way you even set this up at the beginning, you said the strategy was winning legislative races versus just focusing on the executive branch. And I don't even believe that's what our strategy is here at Free the States and what we're doing here in Oklahoma. Because it's not first and foremost about winning the races. It's first and foremost about the way I described it to Darren was I prefer the description of casting out false prophets or gadflying the legislature. Because
Right.
it's not, and some of this goes back to where we started, right? We didn't start with the legislative race. We started with the citizens petition in 2016 that
Mhm.
got challenged by the ACLU of Oklahoma, got rejected by the Oklahoma Supreme Court. The Supreme Court of Oklahoma is actually one of the most liberal courts in the nation. So for how conservative the rest of the government is, the court's terrible. But it got thrown out by the Oklahoma Supreme Court, so we couldn't even collect signatures for our petition initiative anymore. Well, we were having an event, like a conference with a couple hundred people. So we walked across the street to the legislature, started knocking on the doors of every House rep we could, every senator that we could, and explaining to them, laying it out, saying, here's the language we want. Here's what we want in a bill. Like, please, can you take one of your bills that you've already got filed and swap out the language? Because it was past the filing deadlines. It was where they had to file them in their chamber. So we came across Joseph Silk. He had a heartbeat bill at the time. And he was like, I showed up because I really want to do something about abortion. Forget this heartbeat language. You guys are exactly right. This whole no exceptions, not starting at a later time, like that's what we're going to do. And so, after some back and forth a little bit, he ended up deciding to go with our language and moving forward. And that was the first Abolition of Abortion in Oklahoma Act in 2016. So ever since then, because we are most fundamentally about forcing a paradigm shift, about making as many people as possible aware of the difference between pro-life and abolitionism, because they are very different in principle. And when you look back at the history, the primary opponents of the abolitionists of slavery were the gradualists, right? And so we expect that's probably going to be true today. And what do you know? It's the people who are saying, let's do this little piece of let's abolish abortion after they can feel pain, or something like that. Which is like, that's not abolishing it, that's regulating it.
Yeah.
So that's our background and how we even showed up in the first place. There was in 2017 we went to Texas to help push the first AATX bill. And then in 2018, we came back to Oklahoma to focus on a gubernatorial race, mostly because there was this coalition of people building up. I remember meeting Dan Fisher in 2016 in the legislature. Like, he first got familiar with abolitionists and what they were doing while he was a sitting House rep. So it wasn't like we even got to the governor thing before we got to the legislature. It was because of our work with the legislature that we ended up getting a voice in that whole, when it's time to run that campaign. So they ended up running that campaign as an abolitionist campaign, and essentially as a big drop card. It was a big marketing effort. That's really what it is all about at the end of the day, because you're trying to change the paradigm of as many people as possible. And then in 2018, we came back with the hardcore legislative lobby focus. So what I describe what we do, it's even less as with our limited resources, because we don't have unlimited resources. With our limited resources, it's even less about winning the specific races. It's more about being the voice that's calling prophetically for what is right and making it very clear when people are and are not doing what is right. And so you think about the prophets in history, right? And you think about kind of sociologically what they were doing, right? They were, you had the priests who had their official capacities in the temple. Then you had the kings who had their official capacities in the state. But these prophets, they show up all the time. They're kind of these random free agent guys who are running around just telling people when they are or are not following the law of God. And they oftentimes are appearing in front of these priests and kings and telling them what to do, right? I think that sociologically in our culture, you've got the priests functioning in a similar role as the pastors are functioning in a similar role as priests. The legislators and the governor are functioning in a similar role as kings were. And then you have the lobbyists who are functioning in a similar role, not all the same stuff, but a similar role as the prophets. And what you have going on is you have these false prophets, if you will, going up to the Capitol and telling these legislators, this is the law you should pass to be in alignment with what God wants. But they're speaking falsely. They're speaking in a way that literally legislates wickedness. When you talk about why am I blanking on this? Not just unjust decrees, but basically showing partiality through your legislation. Darren, do you know the word I'm looking for here?
In like Psalm 82, Psalm 82 says, "How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked?"
Right.
It's partiality is the word that comes to mind.
For whatever reason, I can't come up with
unjust
the term.
decrees.
But it is like to where you are literally like excluding the fatherless child. So, for example, let's pass a law against abortion with the rape exception.
Yeah,
you're abandoning the most fatherless child that there is, to destruction and to be murdered. Yeah. And so it is iniquitous decrees. You're codifying iniquitous decrees that make the fatherless prey.
Yeah,
that's what the prophets were saying to the kings and saying, that's what you're doing and you need to stop it. Well, that's what the lobbyists should be telling to the legislators, but they're not. So anyway, I view what we do not even mainly as like, running the king's campaign, but mainly as being the prophetic voice that says this is what is right and true and good, and that leads to righteous kings rising up. Does that make sense? Like in terms of the sociological pieces there. And the reason I mention that is like a lot of people can even get focused in on, I'm going to run a campaign, which is not bad, right? And there are people who need to step up and run the campaign. There are people who need to, step up and support a legislative campaign, a legislator's campaign. But that's not what a lobbyist does. That's not the fundamental role that we even play. We play the role of stirring up the people into a knowledge of what's truly going on, exposing wicked deeds and shady dealings that are going on at the Capitol, getting the people to communicate to the kings and say, hey, this isn't how you should be running the show. Like, we got to stop this, and putting pressure on them. So that's what we do. And the reason I even bring that up is it'll come in later into like, what are some of the objections people have to that? Right. And so the reasons, I mean, I could go off here. There's a principled reason for why you should focus on the legislature, right? There it is in basic American civics, law comes from legislators. It's not one individual ruling as however he wants. It is a body of individuals who are making these judgments collectively. That's very protective. There's a reason why that's the case. It's not that an executive shouldn't start taking action if he is given the opportunity. I mean, they are given the opportunity. One of the things you'll see a lot, and this is because this isn't to give an excuse to an executive. One of the things you'll see a lot is no matter what level of government, if someone's on the state level versus federal level, or someone's in the House instead of in the governor's office, or someone's in the governor's office instead of in the Supreme Court, or if someone's in the court instead of in the legislature, everyone will point fingers and say it's everyone else's job to do something.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, it's everyone's job to do something, right? Whether you're the people, whether you're the legislator, whether you're the court, whether you're the governor, right? Everyone is supposed to be doing this, or whether you're the sheriff or the AG or whoever you are, because the supreme law of our land, the Constitution, is being trampled upon. Like the right to life secured in our democratic republic is being completely abused. So you have guys like Greg Treat who will stand up and say, I believe Roe v. Wade was unconstitutional. And he swore an oath to protect the Constitution. But he won't go defend the Constitution against an unjust court.
Right.
Yeah. But that's his responsibility. You even go back to the court case of Marbury versus Madison. That's the argument, is like, well, when the legislature is going against the Constitution and the court has the right to rule according to the Constitution rather than according to the legislature. Well, the opposite argument's true too. Right. Because the law is king. The Constitution is the rule. So anyway, so all that to say, and that's part of the argument for why do you go after the executive first, right? Is you want to if you can get the executive to turn, it's his job to do that too. So he can just start acting and just start doing stuff. And we've put a certain amount of pressure on the executive. We have a website called standwithstit.com with a petition on there. That's like trying to get the people of Oklahoma to rise up and tell Stitt, like, you need to immediately take action, like executive level action. Yeah. But so that's a lot. Do you guys have any questions so far or thoughts?
Well, I think, one thing I'll jump in here, that is a lot. But I appreciate that. I think it's a great explanation of sort of the differences. And there are, like, within this. So when you're talking about the difference, the strategic tactical difference between focusing on the legislator first, marshaling our influence and our resources there, versus doing it toward the executive, you and I are on the same side of that discussion. So I'm not an unbiased third party here. I run an organization that focuses on that particular aspect of the fight. But then within that camp, there are some differences of opinion about how to go about it as well. And I don't think we're going to really discuss that on this podcast, but I do think that it's useful to point out that there are some differences of opinion about how to go about doing that when you're engaging the legislative branch, and how and those differences of opinion break down to, for example, if you're running political races, like if you're involving yourself in that, how do you go about running those races and different things like that. I bring that up just simply to say that this is it's a multifaceted conversation, and I think we're figuring out as we're sort of walking through this. And so while you and I are on the same side of that, we need to focus on the legislator. I agree with you regarding the prophetic voice, that we need to be a prophetic voice, but I'm not sure that you and I are on the same page about how to go about doing that. And so I think that would make for an interesting discussion sometime.
Oh yeah. Because you've got the how loud does a legislator have to be before he's in office? Yeah. Do you have to use the A word instead of pro-life? Yeah. Yeah. Let me just to wrap that up real quick, Darren. Because you've got the do you use the A word, or do you maybe not use pro-life, but just not use any language in a campaign, versus no, you got to force the paradigm shift every single time. Yeah. And I think that may be one of the differences that we have to some degree. Because and some of that comes down to, we view the whole thing as a marketing project. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it's a paradigm shift, and it isn't in normal times, right? If there's not a paradigm shift, and this is all kinds of nerdy sciencey kind of stuff, in normal times, you use the same language and you just, try to kind of sneak it by. But when you've got such a massive shift, it hurts you in the beginning, but then becomes this massive asset to you that you're redefining the terms, or using new terms. And so I think part of why, not the only reason, but part of the reason that Hamilton did so well, he just crushed it in his race, part of the reason he did so well was because he was clearly drawing the line between an abolitionist candidate and his opponent being a pro-life candidate. Yeah. So, and that led to political results because of where we've, gotten to finally in Oklahoma. Now, there's even another difference, and I just say this to encourage people out there if they're like, I don't even know where to start. There's a difference in how you do this, even between are you a marketer versus are you a salesman? I think in that terms, because that's the world I live in business. Right. But I think of the comparison between Free the States and what we do versus Scott Herndon, what he does. Yeah. Right. He does stuff that's public, right? He does stuff to marshal the people to some degree, but he spends way more time working direct one-to-one with legislators than we do. And we spend way more time just making a bunch of public videos that the legislators have to answer to.
Right.
And some of that I think is even difference in gifting, difference in resources.
Sure.
How many people you've got to work with, or whether you've got a crazy freak artist in your midst who can do a bunch of like all that kind of stuff. So there are differences. I think long term marketing will win and will rule the day if you can do that. But there's sales stuff that can be done and be really faithful with it all. And I strongly believe that you have to use the A word. You have to draw the sharp line, or else you're missing the bigger project.
All right. So at this point, we're gonna take a quick break here, and we're gonna go to we're gonna go to the streets and do our street ministry segment, and then hear a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
And one time when I was in Oklahoma, that year that Senator Silk signed the petition, we were going all over the community and sharing the truth and drop carding and getting people to sign petitions. And I always remember speaking to this one young man coming out of a restaurant, and he just was not for abortion except for rape. And so we spent some time talking about it, and I reasoned with him, and I left him some things to consider and some literature. And we just moved on because we had to get on to what we were doing next. I think we went across the road and we were drop carting cars. And that young man apparently had looked up the link that was on the literature I gave him and read through it. And he took the time to come across the road and drive around the parking lot to find me and to tell me how he had changed his mind about rape. And then he didn't realize that how many of those were really not necessary, and that even the ones that they try to justify weren't justifiable. I mean, he was a Christian, but he was believing the rape exception. And we talked about how it seems compassionate, but it's not true compassion. And when we talked it through, and then he looked at that literature, I was just really shocked that he, like he repented so quickly. You never see that, but he considered it, he read it, he looked it up, and he took the time to come find me and tell me how he had changed his mind. I think he said to me, "You changed my mind." I said, "No, the Holy Spirit did that." And thank you so very much for coming to find me and tell me. It really encourages me, because you never really get to see that.
We are Titus 2 women, seeking to glorify God through the teaching of younger women, biblically, to love their husbands, children, and be keepers of the home.
Not grudgingly or as a legalistic chore, but rather to joyfully sacrifice in loving their husband and children as unto the Lord.
Giving glory to God and finding joy in caring for our families in only the way wives and mothers can.
As God has blessed us with female traits that make our work in the home essential to a godly home.
Okay, so we're back from the street ministry segment here, and got the word in there from the Joyful Patriarchy wife, who we thoroughly appreciate them supporting the effort here on the Resisting Balaam podcast. Now, I want to make a quick note here. If you're a listener and you do street ministry, we do want to invite you to send us some audio telling us a story about some interaction that you had while you were out on the street. The goal of this segment is to normalize Christians bringing the gospel outside the four walls of the church and getting active doing ministry in the street. So if you have some story that you'd like to tell on the podcast, shoot us a 3 to 5 minute audio and we'll see if we can get it in. Also, if you're listening right now and you don't do ministry on the street, we want to encourage you to get busy about bringing the gospel to the streets. And so if you have questions about that, or you're interested in getting involved and you just don't know how, reach out to Callie or I. We'll try to get you connected with somebody in your local community there and get some resources to you so that you can get active in bringing the gospel to the market. So, all right. So we're having this discussion. I think we're going to try to zero it in a little bit more here. It's been a really good discussion so far, but we're talking about the necessity and the importance of engaging specifically the legislator, the state legislature, state Senate, state House of Representatives, over and against primarily marshaling or focusing on the executive and so forth. And so let's go ahead and dive back into that conversation. So, and Callie, I'll let you take it away on the interview from here because I know you got some specific questions that you want to ask.
Yeah. So, Josh, you've done a really good job of laying out the playing field and introducing us to the parts and who's responsible for what. So let's start looking at some of the arguments and deal with some of the objections to
Yep.
your strategy. So
Yep.
why don't you lay some of those out for us?
Yeah. So, the arguments again are kind of twofold, right? You've got the principled arguments, which are we covered briefly, like that law comes from the legislature in our form of government, that is more appropriate. The second kind of principled argument is that money comes from the purse strings, which are held by the legislature. So for it to have staying power, for it to be a long-term result in a state, the legislature has to be very firmly on board, or else as soon as that executive is out of there, or as soon as the legislature just decides to cut their funding, it's over, right? And whatever work was gained is lost. So, but the second and really the biggest is a strategic. When you talk about like trying to find where is the fault line, where is the place where if you apply pressure, you're going to gain the most ground the fastest. And I fully believe it's the legislature. Here's so much of why, right? I kind of talked about our experience, how literally you can just walk into the legislature and convince some guy from Podunk, Oklahoma, not that, Broken Bow where Silk's from, whatever. But you can convince some random dude, like, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and file that in my bill. That sounds good. And he might be a rogue in the legislature, and he's got a couple thousand people back at home who voted for him, and he knows that they're going to vote for him no matter what, or he's at the end of his term, so he doesn't have to worry about reelection. And he just is like, yeah, I'll do that. They're not going to let me get my bills through leadership anyway, so yeah, I'll put it out there. As soon as he puts it out there, a really weird thing happens, right? You start getting news coverage. You start getting discussion within the legislature about what's going on. You start getting this attention, which again, the long game is the marketing game. The long game is how do you persuade the people of your state to actually embrace this position? And so when you can convince one random dude from the middle of nowhere to file your bill and you suddenly get on the news, I don't know if you guys have ever tried to run campaigns to get on the news. We've literally like marched down with 200 people in front of the news station singing a custom made song with our petition initiative, stood out in front of it like and had an event, and no news covered it. Like it's really hard to get the attention of a lot of the media. Well, one of the best leverage points we've ever seen has been through actually having a bill in play and having legislators who are going to listen to it. So the step that it's easier to get a legislator to start talking to you and start working with you because they don't, like with the governor, you have to win a statewide race, right? You literally got voted on by all of the people in the state. So you have to have most of the people in the state who are behind a position before the governor can win his race, on your new position. And so the level of what you have to prove in terms of the acceptability of the idea that you're promoting is so high. It takes so much campaigning around the entire state to actually win a governor race or like to get a governor, knowing that it's the will of the people. When you are dealing with just a district, like these guys are known for about 2 weeks every 2 to 4 years, depending on if they're a House guy or depending on if they're a Senate. Their district sees signs in their district for about 2 weeks before an election. Otherwise, nobody knows who they are. Nobody cares about who they are unless they're getting talked about. right?
Right.
So whereas a governor is going to be hearing 10,000 different messages from all these different groups, and some from federal and some like all kinds of different directions, has to weigh in on every piece of legislation and be aware of what's going on with everything. A legislator, like, they never get any attention. They don't get people talking to them or about them. And so one of the things we've had to do is, when you have a committee chair who's been standing in the way of getting anything done, well, you go make sure his district knows about it. You print off a
Right.
bunch of door hangers and you go hang them on 2,000 doors in his district. That's cheap. Like you get 20 people and 4 hours and 2,000 door hangers for what, $500-700, something like that, and suddenly his phone is ringing off the hook with people who are like, Jason's doing that up at the Capitol. I can't believe that. I know him, and his grandma lives down the street. I'm going to go talk to her. That's exactly what happened with Jason Smalley. So the ability to make these individual legislators feel pressure when they're not doing what they should do is so easy. Like it's
right.
It's small potatoes because nobody else is talking about them in their district.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, what you just described there from a tactical standpoint, that is an excellent explanation of why we would focus on a state senator or state representative. It's a small district, and the only time people are saying their names really is if they're doing something bad, right?
Oh yeah.
And so, and you can impact that state senator or that state representative, or you can impact even their legislative race. Like you just said, you can impact their day. You can make them have a really bad day or a really bad week for $500.
Oh yeah.
You can't do that with the governor.
Well, also there's the accessibility. Like you said, you can just walk down the hall, knock down the representative's door, and be like, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you. I'm in your district," or whatever.
Yep.
You can't really do that to the governor.
Oh,
you can't just like show up and expect to talk to him.
If you're a no name, he won't even have the time to meet with you. And that's good. That's right, I think. But it is like, you won't have access.
Yes.
So whereas you can sit down and lay out the arguments for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours with some of these legislators. And they, feel obligated to listen to you kind of because you're, an Oklahoman and they don't have anything better to do.
Well, and I think what you said, one thing you said along the ways there, and then what you just described a few minutes ago, sort of, it really codifies our strategy in a nutshell, or tends to, which is that I'm going to talk to the legislators to try to persuade them to carry my bill or whatever. After that, I'm going to talk to their voters.
Yep.
I'm not going to sit around and like here it was, Todd Houston is Speaker of the House here. I'm not going to sit around in Todd Houston's office and debate with him a whole lot about getting him to hear our bill.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm going to go to his district and talk to his voters.
Yep.
And you get the access to them is good. You guys have more access in Oklahoma, by the way, than any other state that I've ever done any work in. In Indiana, the state representative and the state senator offices are like behind a guard, and you can't get through there unless you're
not even
friends
allowed
with
to
somebody.
walk through there. Wow.
Nope.
That's
Can't
crazy.
do it. I don't know what it's like in Texas because I've never been to the state house down in Texas, but I know several other states are like that. Illinois, Tennessee, Mississippi are all like that. The only way you can go talk directly to the state representatives is if you have an appointment with them and it's cleared with the security and so forth. But you still, even that considered, you still can get a state senator or a state representative, especially if they're your state senator or state representative, to sit down and talk with you. And that is one strategic advantage. But the ability to impact when they get 100 phone calls in a day, because you talk to their voters and all you're doing is reporting to their voters what they did. That's all you're doing. You're just telling them, hey, did you know that your state senator did X, Y, or Z? And you can get their attention and have an impact on their day, just quite frankly, just that simply. And it is a humongous, it provides a humongous strategic advantage, in my opinion.
Well, and it's funny because you talk about having their voters. You don't even really have to use their voters. If you just get a whole bunch of your friends to start calling and emailing them, even if they're your friends, you don't lead with this, but even if your friends aren't necessarily right there in the state, some of them can be, but some of them maybe not. They're still going to pay attention to the fact that there's a bunch of eyes on this subject in my state right now. And
Yeah.
so one of the big things we do every spring is we put out the email lists of here's all the emails for these guys, and you need to send something with a subject line that's roughly about, we're not fooled by this licensure bill or whatever, replacement they're trying to put forward and pretend like is covering. And you send it to all the senators or all the House reps, and suddenly, their assistants are having to count. Okay, so how many people are upset about that bill? And like, do we know we have people on our side or not? Like, where are we at? How's it all leveling up? Because really, the question they're always asking is, you and what army? Right? Like, how many people, they look at you and they're trying to figure out, like, how many people are behind you, right?
Yeah.
Are there 10 people? Are there 100 people? Are there 1,000 people? Which, as a brief aside, is part of why it's so powerful whenever pastors will actually show up and speak directly with their legislators. Yeah. Because they look at pastors differently. They look at pastors and they know you probably at least have 100 people behind you. And it freaks them out. So when we showed up this year with a petition that had over 100 pastors' signatures on it, that was a lot of people. Like they looked at 100 pastors, but it's like you multiply that by 100 or 1,000, and that's a lot of people represented in that petition.
Yeah. Well, and now that you guys have unseated a couple of establishment people with your people that they know, that also gives you even more pressure the next time you say, hey, here's this thing. You've already seen what our army can do.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, no, we're really stepping into this moment where we are going to show up this year at the Capitol, and they know exactly who we are, and they know exactly how scary we are.
Yeah.
And so, because what's happened, and not only did you have abolitionist candidates who were running in districts of people who were targets last year, like Paul Scott, people who would say like he had been a sponsor, took his name off the bill. And in private conversations, what he was saying is like, what do you want me to do? Challenge the throne?
Yep.
And it's like, yeah, you've got to challenge the throne, the pro tem, the party leadership, and say, this is what's right. We have to do it. Yes, I want you to challenge the throne. Well, he didn't. He refused to challenge the throne. He bowed to the leadership. And then we ran an abolitionist in his district. She didn't win, but she took enough votes away from him to force a runoff between him and the other candidate. And the other candidate beat him. So on that front, we unseated an incumbent because of an abolitionist candidate running. On the other side of stuff, there was this huge, and this is why, again, the point that's being made here is don't underestimate the impact that can be made through the legislature. Like it's a small cost of entry to get attention, but huge impact of that attention between news and even, what can happen in races. So this, on the other one, Hamilton ran against Larry Boggs, and everyone knew Hamilton was supposed to be the new Silk, right? Hamilton was running, Silk was done in the legislature. Hamilton's running to replace him so that we have someone to file the AAOK bill. And so they came after him. They spent money like crazy. When I say they, I mean all of the senators. Like it was a who's who show on his Facebook page. If you go back and look at Larry Boggs' campaign Facebook page, it was like everybody in the Senate was coming to his district for photo ops to show we support this guy against Hamilton. It got to such a level because this never happens, right? But it was such a fever pitch race that the senators and House reps who are like the federal level senators and House reps were coming to weigh in. Like Senator Langford, who's extremely conservative, but he endorsed Larry Boggs against Warren Hamilton. Governor Kevin Stitt endorsed Larry Boggs against Warren Hamilton. So when you talk about like picking the either or, through the work we've done in the last really 2 years for strong pressure, big impact, but like 4 years at most, through the work we've done in the last 2 to 4 years, you've got a contested race that the governor is weighing in on between two Republicans. So like the governor's literally having to pick between people in his party, and he's picking against the abolitionist. So, and again, Hamilton ran a flagrantly abolitionist campaign, was very out in the open about it. We were fully endorsing him. He spoke from the stage back at the Free the States rally back in February. And Hamilton, it was another situation where there were three candidates. The third forced the runoff between the top two. Runoff between Boggs and Hamilton. Even though Boggs won, like had a little bit more of the vote in the original primary, in the runoff, usually the more conservative candidate wins. The people who show up to vote are more picky. And Hamilton, there was a lot of drama. There was all kinds of like, you can go read the news articles that we put out and stuff like that. But basically, Hamilton ended up beating Boggs. One of the reasons that people were claiming to endorse Boggs instead of Hamilton was that they were saying, they had to have someone who could beat the Democrat. Well, Boggs threw his weight behind the pro-choice Democrat in his district. Boggs endorsed the Democrat against Hamilton. Hamilton crushed the Democrat. Like, I can't remember the number. I think it was like 72%. It was in the 70s. But it was like Hamilton won something 70-30, basically.
Yeah.
And Boggs had only won like 56 or some much more insignificant. I think Hamilton improved the margin by 16 points. So huge political impact, and everybody was betting against him, and just and trying to throw their weight against him. So we have flagrantly, like explicitly gotten the attention of the governor on abolitionism through the legislature.
Right. So what are some of the big,
yeah.
What are some of the big objections, the best objections, and how do you respond?
Yeah, and this is why I explained as much as I did about our difference and how we operate. So there are a lot of people who are very jaded. There are a lot of people who have worked with the legislature for years, who have done different things as lobbyists to push different caucuses and all kinds of different elements of it, right? And so they may have had, a 5-10 member caucus at one time that was largely, because of all the work that they had done in appointing, in elections, right? And like making sure you get the right guy in there. Well, the problems are twofold. Number one, even a 10-member caucus can't do anything. So you can still get crushed by leadership. But number two, treachery is a real thing. So people run on a platform, get into office, realize they're not going to get anything done if they don't cow to leadership. And then guess what they do? They pull their name off your bill and say, sorry, guys, I'm going to follow leadership or else I'm not going to get anything done. And so, you end up having these faithless legislators who had been your candidate in the beginning, but then they bailed on you when it really came to, push came to shove. So it's that jaded experience and thinking that that's not going to work. Now, that's why what we do is different than what people have done historically. People, when they usually get political, they usually focus so heavily on the legislature and they start just playing the legislature game. We are not playing we're playing the people game. We are making the people in a district aware of a thing. We are making more and more people in Oklahoma, and this is where the paradigm shift is so important. We are making more and more people in Oklahoma aware of the difference between pro-life and abolition. We're dramatizing it on the stage of the legislature of abolitionist legislators put forward bills that have the 5 components, and pro-life legislators try to put forward every other kind of bill that they try to find one of those components they can pull out because they're not willing to put forward a 5-component bill. And it's just clear as day. And so what's happening is, and that's why we're big, we're very focused on the rally as a big thing we do and the conference to train people. And we view our role primarily right now as how do you mobilize and enable churches, because they look at those pastors and they look at those churches and they see large numbers. The more churches that will get on board, the farther this thing's going to go politically. And so our focus and our attention is not even really on, almost to a fault, in terms of how limited our resources are right now. like we're not spending a bunch of money on campaigns. We can and we will long term, but like the focus when it's like what's the very tip of the spear that has to go through is on the people. It's on the paradigm shift. It's on getting people to call themselves abolitionists and to break from the typical pro-life strategy, because then they stop following these false lobbyists, these lobbyists who are out there spreading like, oh, this is the strategy, when it's a wicked, iniquitous decree strategy. So it's about replacing those prophets, right? It's about casting out the false prophets, being the true prophets, and leading the people to speak with the prophetic voice. So, and that's why, so partiality, man, God hates partiality. I can tell you, if one of the reasons why people don't like Free the States is how much we are willing to call names. And there is an awareness, and there must be an awareness that if someone starts going the wrong direction, we don't care how invested and involved they've been with us, right? If Warren Hamilton were to step up and start trying to pass a heartbeat bill next session, guess what Free the States would do? We would come hard. Like the hammer would fall the hardest on Warren Hamilton. Mm-hmm. And that's different. Usually people in playing politics, they're trying to make these backroom deals and kind of get chummy and, like think that they have to handle everyone with, like the really soft gloves, right? And we're like, nope, we're going to say it like it is from day one. It's going to cost us the first couple of years, and then it's going to gain us a mile afterwards, because then nobody can go be treacherous. Then right. Everyone knows when you saw that group of 2,500 people who showed up at the Capitol, they showed up because they believe hardcore in what we're saying. And it also keeps the people from being deceived. If you call names early, right, and if you make it clear to the public, like warning, 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 this is the bad thing that's going on, the secret deal that's happening, it helps the people get accustomed to the type of treachery you see at the Capitol, get familiar with replacement bills and the way they try to run cover and claim to still be pro-life by running the most pro-life legislation that is clearly just so they don't have to do your bill. Yeah. And if you're calling that out from day one, nobody can turn around and be faithless on you. Nobody can turn around and be treacherous towards you, or else all the people are going to be up in arms and tar and feather them.
Yeah.
So that's So even now, the other argument that I hear is like, well, if you get an executive and the Spirit of God does this work, right? If you really trust the Spirit of God, which is like, okay, we all have to trust the Spirit of God in our work. Don't try to set that up and say that's a strategy. That's not what we do. But it's like, once God changes just the one heart, then everything just happens. And so it's simpler, because you only have to change one heart instead of having to change 50 hearts, right, in the legislature to get your bill passed.
Yeah.
And it's like, in my mind, that's so insane, because it's like the governor is going to have so much more pressure, so much more peer pressure, so much more awareness of all the risks, right, than an individual legislator. And if you can't change the minds of those 50 legislators, if your argument is not that good, if the people are not that behind it, why would you ever get a governor? I mean, yes, you can like stake it on like the miraculous work of God, but to take it a step further, say you get a governor and he does this for 2 to 3 years, and then he runs and he gets kicked out because the people aren't behind it, or he gets other programs defunded, and people are all up in arms about that, and they kick him out of office. It reverts right back to normal. Mm-hmm. And so you didn't really gain any ground, because you didn't get people rallying to that cause. You didn't build the wave, like the momentum of the movement. And by trying to do the end around and, kind of shortcut on it, you basically didn't gain any ground for all that effort.
Yeah.
So, and it's not any, right? It's more nuanced than that. And obviously the reason, you can run a gubernatorial campaign that gets a lot of news, that gets a lot of attention, the governor is going to get a lot of news. You could potentially rally people through that. So if there is a faithful governor out there, they can have an impact. But it's just there's you have so much less leverage because when you have to in Oklahoma when you have to talk to 3 million people versus 3,000 in a district, like it's just so much easier to impact the small district.
Yeah.
So
So, in terms of as you're thinking through the way that you guys are going to go about looking at what you're doing in the future and so forth, what percentage of your time? I mean, I have a pretty good ideas based on everything that you just said, but what percentage of your time are you spending specifically on the legislator and lobbying, whether it be to the people of a certain legislative district or a specific legislator? Spending time lobbying the legislator, whether it be Senate or House, versus spending time trying to engage with the governor and the executive branch and so forth. How do you break that down?
yeah, so it's funny because our engaging with legislators largely looks like communicating with the media. It too,
Yeah.
like there's a weird even piece with that, but I I expect part of it depends on how far we get, how much ground we've really gained this year. In normal years, it is 98% of our time on legislature and like 2% of our time on governor stuff
Yeah.
because it's so hard to get attention. There's so much noise in that whole subject. Now, we know this year that Stitt has directly been involved in one of the races. So it's like he's taken a position on the issue already. And so we may be a little bit louder about that, pushing that a little bit harder. But again, and part of this comes down to as well, once you're gaining momentum in one area, you don't want to like stop that momentum and try to go gain the momentum in the other area because then you'll lose the momentum in the first thing. It's like let the momentum build and carry the whole thing.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to. That's why we're even so focused on Oklahoma. That's like just a consistent momentum thing, as opposed to going up to Indiana and applying a lot of our pressure up there right now. It's just resources, right? Focus.
Yeah.
We're going to continue to apply pressure and build that momentum. Now, if it passes the Senate and gets over into the House and then Stitt starts having to talk about it, we might gain the ear in the next year or two of Stitt to actually start having the direct conversation. I mean, if stuff ends up happening with Biden winning and everybody gets all fighty and like, all right, this is our time, maybe the Republican Party of Oklahoma completely flips and decides we're pushing abolition. Let's go.
Yeah.
I have no idea how it all is going to play out, but we're going to take the governor piece as it comes to us in the momentum.
Yeah.
As opposed to trying to force that issue before it's there.
Yeah.
And that's not, it's not, I mean, in all our pamphlets, we mention them in all our, every rally, we mention them and all that, but as far as where we marshal people to, it's to committee meetings. It's to where is the bill right now? Let the bill play out in the legislative process. And wherever it's getting stuck, that's where we're going to be yelling and screaming as loud as humanly possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Gotcha. All right. So I think this has been a good discussion so far. We're coming up on right around the time where I think we need to be getting ready to wrap things up here. So, Callie, did you have any other questions you want to ask before we get into the encouragement aspect of the discussion?
No, I think that this has been really helpful. So I like the way that it's all been laid out, and I hope that our listeners can start to see all of these moving parts and to see that it's not about passing a bill, right? It's more than that. It's not about running a campaign. These are all pieces that work together to shift the way people think about abortion and the way people view the system that is designed to keep them in darkness, right? So the more we can show people all of these moving parts, the parts that are the biggest obstacle, and rally the people behind those points to make an impact and to get that movement going. I think that was really helpful the way you've explained all of that.
Yeah, and Callie, if I could say one more thing on that, if people are out there kind of confused about like, oh, I didn't even know there was like a controversy here. Part of the thing is because we're first and foremost in service of the movement and in service of the larger scale paradigm shift, and we know that like these different pieces, even if they're not as effective in our belief, we know that they still serve pushing the paradigm a little bit further. We don't make our disagreements about strategy stuff very public because we're not wanting to sit around and fight with people and slow people down. It's like, okay, get as far as you can with that thing. We just make our decisions because we really do believe there's a more effective way to do it. There's a best way to do it. And we know that we have to lead. The best way to do that and to get people on board with our position on a subject like that is to lead by example, to make people wonder, like, why are they gaining as much ground as they are in Oklahoma? And then start to truly ask it and their own strategizing. And then we can tell them, and yeah, we have an opinion on it and we believe it. But we have to prove it first. And so just know, like, we don't have this like opposition to all the other people who do all the other strategies, whether in Oklahoma or in other states or whatever. We just think this is what's going to work. And insofar as we are trying to lead people the direction that we think they need to go, that's why we have to make it really clear what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Right. It's not like a beef between like abolitionism and gradualism, right?
Exactly. Right.
It's one of these things where the strategy isn't sinful.
Right.
It's not wicked in the same way that, you know, these incremental bills are wicked.
Right.
So these types of discussions generally happen behind closed doors between friends. They get heated and most people don't know about them, but the people that do can sit back and listen to them lecture, and things they might say that go over everybody's head. You go, oh, okay, I see what you're saying in that. You know what I mean? So, but like you said, we're brothers and we're in the fight together. And there's just a difference of strategy, both of them being acceptable, just which one is more viable.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And really the only thing we ask from people who disagree with us on the strategies and stuff like that is just that they not, you know, undercut what we're doing and say we're not, you know, as good or something because we're not doing their way. Because we go out of our way to not come after people. Like, even if we disagree on strategy like that, we're aware when they're doing something. We're like, yeah, I don't know if that's going to be the best way. We'll talk to them. But it's like, okay, at the end of the day, you're doing your thing. We're doing ours. We're all trying to build the movement and shift the paradigm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there are some things that you said even today that would be things that I wouldn't agree with strategically. But I think that, you know, as brothers, we need to be able to have those conversations. And we really also need to be able to learn to, like Kelly said, sit and listen to this guy talk, hear everything that he says. Hold your tongue. You don't have to jump in and respond right away. You know what I mean? Be gracious, be patient, and hear the reasons why this person who's involved in the battle. It's not like, you know, if a person's if they're pro-life, they're part of the pro-life establishment, or they're into pro-lifeism, or they're just not involved in the battle, and they have a bunch of opinions. Well, yeah, I mean, we can, you know, there's a certain amount of dismissiveness probably that takes place there. But when we're talking about brothers who are active in the battle, who are working, trying to bring about the abolition of abortion, they're not compromising on principles of abolitionism. There's a needfulness of having some of these conversations, and, you know, having them even vigorously, but also recognizing and acknowledging that we don't have to attack that group or that organization because they're working a different strategy than maybe what we're working. And so I think there's a lot of value in approaching it from that standpoint. And I love Free the States. You know, I love everything that you guys are doing. Even where we don't agree strategically, I mean, I see why you're doing what you're doing, and I think there's a lot of value in it.
Yep.
And there's good stuff happening in
Oklahoma. Yeah, we're trying to make sure that everything we do, yes, it's focused on Oklahoma right now, but even in the way that we do it, in terms of like putting out ideology further, like helping set the tone for rhetoric, all the memes, all the videos, like all that kind of stuff. We're always thinking about like how do we you know, raise the tide for everyone? How do we make it easier for you to do your work in Indiana, even if it's not the exact niche or whatever that we would do? Like, we really are trying to do things in such a way that like helps everybody's battle be easier, clearer, more straightforward,
Yeah.
what it should be.
I think you guys do a great job of that. Like, I appreciate the stuff that you guys put out on the Facebook page. I appreciate the training materials and stuff like that that you guys are putting out. And so I know, like, I bring up myself, I know we're having this discussion regarding the governor versus focusing on the legislator.
Mhm.
But we need to, I mean, I've sat around and talked with you and some of the other guys over there at Free the States for hours, you
Mhm.
know. And those are fun, sitting over a plate of pancakes at IHOP at 2
Oh
o'clock in the
man,
morning, you
oh
know,
man,
working through some of these things.
the hours
Um,
worth of material we have to. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, right,
yeah,
right, yeah, exactly. So, and I mean, I think that's great, and it's a lot of fun, and we need more of that. And so, I appreciate you coming on today, and I appreciate the perspective that you presented here. I think that there's a lot of value in what you guys are doing at Free the States. I appreciate the way that you have a surgical focus on shifting the paradigm. That's what you guys are about, and everything that you do is a work unto that end. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that in a movement where we tend to be more like herding cats. I really appreciate the level of focus that you guys have on that, and so appreciate you coming on to the show today. And my encouragement would just be, so I'll give my encouragement first here, and then I'll let you guys. We usually close it out with a word of encouragement to the listeners. I'll do mine first this time. Normally, I do mine last, but my encouragement would be that to the people that are listening right now that are not involved in the political aspect of the fight, which is a lot of abolitionists are not involved in the political aspect of the fight. And my encouragement would be to listen to these words that Josh has shared today, and maybe to think some of the things that he talked about. We didn't talk a lot about the doing, because this is more of a strategic discussion, like a strategic disagreement discussion. But some of the things that he talked about were like really simple things that if there's an organization in your area that's working on trying to abolish abortion, like some of these things you can plug in and say, oh, we need to go drop some door hangers.
yep.
Let's go drop some door hangers. Take it 4 hours. And you'll have a tremendous impact in the political sphere just doing that. Oh, we need to make a phone call to a legislator. That'll take me 5 minutes. Let's make a phone call to the legislator. And, you don't even have to know all the inner workings of all of the other strategic things in order to do either one of those two things. They're very simple things. So you can just say, okay, I need to make this phone call. Okay, I need to go drop these door hangers. And so my encouragement would be to find that way that you can get yourself involved in the little things. And then maybe, that as you get yourself more involved, maybe you'll find an interest, or you'll find a place for you in that. But we're trying to save babies at the abortion mill. We're trying to save babies through social media, but we're also trying to save babies by changing the law. And we all can play some role in that in some way, shape, or form. So that would be mine. Callie, what would be yours?
Yeah, I like what you said, and um, I would encourage people to get, like you said, get involved, and with the understanding that the purpose is to help educate the citizens on what is righteous,
Hmm.
Yeah.
right? And to help
Amen.
motivate th- that type of righteous response. So when there's something like I don't know what you call it, Abolition Day, or whatever at
Yep.
the Capitol, go and show your support.
Yeah.
It means a lot when you have 2 to 5,000 people show up at the state capitol. The media has to say something.
Hmm.
They can't just let that go. So it brings attention to what the differences are, and so just be encouraged by going out and making yourself available.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Josh, okay, so say you're talking to somebody that's listening right now. They haven't, maybe they go to the abortion mill,
Yep.
they hold the sign, they do sidewalk counseling, or, they post memes on Facebook or whatever. They're abolitionists, but they haven't really been involved so much in the political aspect. What word of encouragement would you give them to close out this episode?
Yeah, so it's funny because I think I would say the same two things that you guys said. And I was already thinking about them in a little bit different way.
Okay.
First off, just know that we are one body and many members. Like the people
Amen.
of God have a bunch of different roles, and just because someone else does something with their primary effort doesn't mean that they're saying you have to do that with your primary effort necessarily.
Mhm.
You do need to be like always reevaluating yourself in light of like the Word of God, in light of what is the most effective with the, being a good steward of the resources He's provided you, the skills He's provided you. But and so it is cool to see a guy like John Jacob go from street preacher, to preaching in the Capitol to legislator. That's a pretty cool trajectory there. But just know it's not like anybody's saying, oh, you have to follow that path that he did. You may stay as the person who's always there at the abortion clinic, but just because we're one body, many members, doesn't mean we don't have need of each other and we don't have involvement with each other.
Yeah.
Right. And so, number one, don't say like, you shouldn't really be doing the legislative stuff because that's just a distraction from the real work to build up your work that you're doing. It's like, that's not true. And I don't say that about the clinic ministry either.
Amen.
Right.
Yeah.
We need people everywhere doing everything. We all have to answer to our Creator for how we use our limited resources, but it's like not because one is better than the other necessarily, principally or something like that.
Yeah.
Right.
But the other thing about that whole like one body, many members thing that I think a lot of people miss is that the other members are there to help make you stronger, not to do it all for you. Right.
Yeah.
So like if you feel like, oh, I can do all the political stuff and the door hangering because I'm like incompetent when it comes to like going out and doing street ministry, you probably need to go spend some time with someone who's good at street ministry.
Yeah.
So that you're sharpened and you're strengthened and you can grow under their example.
Yeah.
Because we are to strengthen each other and make each other like grow in all these different aspects. So it is like, go look for ways that you can come along with and support. I mean, it's been great because even in Oklahoma this year, there's been like clear, like there have been some people who have been, more classic abolitionists who've been a little bit more distant from the political stuff because they're just like, well, I don't want to change what it is like the street ministry and stuff. It's like, we're not saying don't do that. Just come with us, and who are getting more on board with like coming with us and being a part of it.
Yeah. That's good.
So work together.
Yeah. Amen.
But then the other piece of it is piggyback on what Callie said. If you're still having hesitation about the political stuff because you're like, but I just want to share the gospel with people. We don't do the political work because it's politics. We do it because it's a love your neighbor issue.
Amen.
We also do it because, and this is, even though it's a specific application of it, there's a general truth behind the passage in Galatians that talks about how the law is a tutor, right?
Yeah.
When you have a law that says it's okay to, or like you can't kill your child after there's a beating heart, which most pro-lifers would be like, that's the best of the best kind of stuff. That's as best as we could expect.
Yeah.
If you say, okay, it's not okay to kill your child after a beating heart, people will show up at the clinic the next day and they'll say, hey, we're good. Like, it doesn't have a beating heart, so we're fine.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And it's not just that they're saying that as an excuse. They're repeating it because you've convinced them of the truth of that because that's how you legislate.
Yeah, amen.
They are fully embracing these deceptions that are codified in these pro-life measures that are there because they're trying to be clever within Roe v. Wade instead of opposing it.
Amen.
Right.
Roe v. Wade was wicked. Roe v. Wade has led to the mass murder of 65 million innocent children in our culture. It can't be coddled. It can't be like, okay, we're going to accept these 3 parts of it, but then try to reject the rest of it and see if we get allowed to by the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
We have to stand up against it today because we have to tell the truth about it. Like, if you're, my roots are kind of connected to like Ray Comfort evangelism kind of thing of, breaking people with the law, right? And like speaking directly about how what they are doing is transgressing the law of God. Well, when you stand up in your culture and you start saying, hey, if you have killed your child, you've murdered them. And that's what that is from point of fertilization on. If you've been a party to the murder, like the death of an unborn child, like the willful killing of an unborn child, that's murder.
Yeah.
Suddenly, tons of people have to wake up and be like crushed under the weight of the law because they realize like there's blood on my hands.
Yeah.
But what does that do? it finally makes them sensitive to the love of Christ and his sacrifice,
Yeah.
the grace of God that brings salvation. And so, like, the purpose of telling the culture through a bill, hey, abortion is murder, is to help those who have murdered their child through abortion no longer be justifying themselves, but instead, like, humble themselves and repent and believe in the gospel.
Amen. All right, so Josh, I just want to say again, man, thanks so much for joining us. You can find out more about Free the States at freethestates.com. You can also search Free the States on the Facebook there, and I definitely would encourage you to follow their social media platform there. I believe y'all are on Twitter as well, right?
I don't know if that one gets used as much,
Yeah,
but I'm
mostly
pretty sure we
Facebook.
have one. There's an Instagram, but yeah, Facebook's right now where we've been doing the heavy lifting.
Mostly Facebook, yeah.
YouTube's
Yeah.
a big one for if you want to watch full episodes of the podcast.
Yeah.
The guys have been doing a terrific podcast, about 13 episodes. Start at the beginning
Yeah.
because they really do lay a foundation for all the ideology and all the history and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a good way to get into it.
Yeah, definitely encourage everybody to check out the Free the States podcast, which you can get it on YouTube. I think the episodes are on Facebook as well. But so go check that out. I encourage you to do that. And lots of great training material, especially if you're just getting started. Like, that's good foundational stuff to learn. So
The 5 components of an abolition bill are one of the most important things. If you're getting into political stuff, you
yeah,
have to know inside and out the 5 components of the abolition bill. If
Yeah.
there's an article on our site, because like all the replacement bills are trying to tweak 1 or 2 of those principles.
there's a lot of stuff trying to pass for abolitionism right now that
Oh,
really
yeah.
isn't actually. So yeah, definitely check that out. Until next time, hope you guys take some time to check out the Free the States Facebook page there and check out the website. Until next time, we want to invite you to join the resistance and world disorder truth. Our Lord has left us here to navigate through this world as priest in the kingdom of God. Apply the mind of Christ and battle against the culture that hates God and loves death.